And our next presentation is from Mark Sparvell, who, as I said in the intro, is joining us in the middle of the night from Australia. So I'm going to unshare my screen, and hopefully you can see then. In fact, Mark has already done it. Mark's a professional. He just takes over. It's fantastic. So over to you, Mark. Thank you very much for joining us.
Okay, in about 15 minutes, other Mark?
Yep.
Sounds great. Okay, so g'day everybody and welcome to the session. First of all, thanks to Mark and Tim for this invitation to join you, and consider this, if you like, to be both an introduction and an invitation. It's a brief introduction to some of the priorities that Microsoft is focused on in education this year, and also it's an invitation to follow up. Anything you hear in this session, I'll make sure the slides are available in free access to you after the session. So feel free to follow up. My Twitter handle is on the screen down below, and also there's a link to a group that I founded on Facebook a couple of years ago, the Cell and Edu group. We're almost around 15,000 educators strong. Social and emotional learning is fundamental and no longer ornamental to education. So if you have a passion around that topic, feel free to join us in that community. This theme of enabling schools and students to be successful really grabbed my attention, hence it is 2:30 a.m. In Melbourne. I'm usually based in Seattle in Washington State. But before that, I want to talk a little bit about stress. You've probably heard those stories about spiders in Australia and creepy crawlies. This is a photo taken when I woke up this morning and sat down at my computer ready to log into this event. This is the spider that was on my screen. You can see that I'd actually just taken my hat off and dropped it on there. So that's my little plug for the Australian Tourism Commission. This stuff is real. But you know, certainly did it stress me for a moment? It did. And our brains are built for stress, not just in the long term. More on that in a moment. Back to your theme. It really connected with me. Our mission at Microsoft in education is to empower every learner and every educator on the planet to achieve more, to do more, to expect more, and to achieve more. And for us, listening to the previous speakers, this is anchored around this notion of how do we help schools and systems and classrooms? How do we help support them to drive equitable education? Fairness in education. We know that potential is equally distributed, but opportunity is not. So we believe that every learner deserves access to the best learning opportunities, the best support systems, regardless of their ability or disability, regardless of their income, their language, whether they're a student who's had their formal education interrupted through forced mobility, or their geography, where they live, and also how they identify. So again, what I want to do in this session is just to sort of at a higher level talk about this. But back to our friend and stress. Certainly the last year has been a complex year, and as an educator of 25 years experience in classroom, in school leadership roles, regional district leadership roles, even in higher education, one thing I know is that our job, our shared job, has always had an emotional labour attached to it, which makes our profession unique. But that emotional labour has certainly been amplified over the last couple of years. Some research published by MIT that was just updated a couple of months ago looked at, we know that teachers are stressed and school leaders, but why are they stressed? What are the three things that seem to be causing this degree of stress that they can't get away from? Because the brain, like dealing with my spider, is designed for stress, right? It's we're biologically hardwired. In a sense, the brain at a kind of a molecular level, if you talk to a developmental molecular biologist like John Medina, he will say the brain actually likes it. It's designed for it, but it's not designed to feel out of control, where it's stressed for long periods of time. That's when the brain doesn't work well at all. We asked teachers, or sorry, MIT asked teachers, well, what was causing this stress? And they said, number one, it was about the motivation of students was causing them stress. They were concerned that not having the physical engagement, the physical proximity, that they were unable to read the cues and understand at the level they wanted to how students were feeling and how students were being activated for deep learning. Burnout was the next thing causing teacher stress. No surprise there. But what was interesting was that the protective factor for teachers like you, like me, was always other teachers, and for leaders was other leaders. So they were a protective factor for us in our emotional toil of doing our job, and that had been removed. And the third thing, going right back to our previous speaker about the TAP program, was teachers and leaders were stressed by exacerbated inequities. They were really concerned about the compounding effect of poverty or about identity or geography being played out in remote learning, with issues with access to technology, to devices, to connectivity. So that was stressing people out quite a lot. It comes back to this notion of what matters most, is that emotions matter most right now. And a previous other speaker talked about that sense of control. Emotions are the gatekeeper to attention, to motivation, and to cognition, how we think and process information, how we invest our most precious resource, and why we do what we do. Emotions are the gatekeeper to those. So where we have a focus in schools around social and emotional learning, when we engage in emotional check-ins, where we develop with intent the language to describe emotions, it's giving students that sense of control over one thing in a world that can seem largely out of control, which is how their emotions can help or hinder, can hijack, and how they can regulate their emotions and responses. If you like, it's an upstream strategy to minimize the negative impacts downstream of living in situations which feel out of control, are ambiguous, and are complex. We have a great working relationship with Mark Brackett at Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence. We love this idea of helping students to develop an emotional granularity. And you can see on this, we won't do this activity in the interest of time, but we would always start any learning activity with adults or students using something like a mood meter. So left to right moves from unpleasant to pleasant emotions, not good or bad. All emotions matter and serve a purpose. And each quadrant goes from low energy to high energy. So sometimes asking people in a check-in, how do you want to feel, is better than how are you feeling. Sometimes it's useful to ask, what couple of emotions are you feeling? Because sometimes we're feeling anxious and excited. You might ask questions simply around, what's your mood like? Is it low energy or high energy? Or is your mood maybe pleasant or unpleasant? It doesn't always have to have the label attached at the same time. So we won't do the feeling bit. What I want to do is just step through some resources and leave behinds, and maybe leave you with a sense of the things that we're thinking about. We think about the future of work and the kinds of skills which the new economy is placing a priority on. And you can see that at the moment, HR professionals across the globe are calling out that they're lacking problem solving, critical thinking, innovation, and creativity. Again, the ability to deal with complexity and ambiguity, and also the ability to communicate with a wide range of people, to have that sort of cultural intelligence, that sensitivity and empathy. These are all skills needed in the workforce right now, today, not someday. Interestingly, students who were successful across the sort of forced remote learning last year, this is from a UK study on the left, demonstrated these particular skills. And I just thought it was interesting that those skills were very much the skills that are in demand in the workforce. So when we look at the Hadron Collider experiment of 2020 to right today, as the particles were spun around and slammed into the wall, there are some interesting learnings coming through from there. 2020 certainly was not a year of learning loss. It was a year where formal learning was interrupted, but there's been a lot of learning about learners and learning, teachers and teaching, which we can take forward. So what do we know about the future of learning when we pause to consider this? One thing we've heard, and I've heard it through every speaker this morning, is that equity, enabling equitable education, must be at the centre of everything that we do. That when we design and plan with intent to ensure that everybody succeeds, and then everybody benefits from that. So what we've been doing and focusing on, and I'll show you a couple of examples and then leave you with some resources. We're focused around inclusively designed learning, how do we accelerate learning, and how do we help foster well-being? And not Microsoft doing these things, but Microsoft providing the tools, the platform, the training and the research that helps schools and systems if these are their priorities. And we know that for many students, the events of the last 2 years have impacted them differently than other students. So when we look at inclusively designed, you know, within this, we're picking up students who maybe are finding themselves, who were already struggling because of issues with learning, dyslexia, maybe they were on the autism spectrum disorder, maybe they were English language learners. So those students have been impacted even more in this push to remote learning, or students living in poverty, or students, a million reasons. Accelerate learning is another section, and in this what we're interested in is maybe just flipping around remediation and thinking about acceleration. Acceleration often placed in the domain of gifted and talented students. We're interested in the role that technology around analytics can play in providing that scaffolding for all students to be able to access the kind of content that really engages them, but is also appropriate for them. And obviously well-being. Some examples on this, but in the well-being section, particularly how do we foster emotional well-being, and how do we provide the students and the teachers and the head teachers with the information that can help them to intervene early and often. So a couple of quick examples. And in terms of looking at the inclusively designed, this is just a screen grab of the new released reading progress, which sits within Microsoft Teams. As teachers, we've all engaged in running records. We all know that readers make leaders. We all know that fluency and accuracy are critical for comprehension and inference. So reading progress helps teachers, doesn't replace teachers, but helps teachers with that very heavy burden of listening to reading and identifying miscues and identifying omissions and mispronunciations and repetition. So has an AI backbone. The students read, you can see the video capture there, the piece of text that's on the screen that the teacher provides at a suitable level to them, and then the AI algorithm behind analyzes, identifies the words per minute, the accuracy rate, and then begins to provide some prompts. Another example would be, for reading, would be picking up Immersive Reader. And again, all of the links to these and all of what you're looking at is completely free. Immersive Reader, which breaks words into syllables, you'll all be familiar with this, pronounces the words, adds picture dictionary to the words, Beneath that, increasing math understanding, again, totally free. Try it out straight away at onenote.com. Students ink up maths equations. Not only are the equations converted from handwriting into mathematical symbols, Immersive Reader will read the steps back to them, and Microsoft Forms will automatically generate additional quiz questions of the same level of difficulty. It's like having an extra set of hands in a busy classroom. Things like enhancing communication with PowerPoint Coach, super powerful. If you're a teacher and you've ever had to endure a very boring student presentation, PowerPoint Coach both gives the students the opportunity, the scaffolding and the feedback to improve their oral presentation, completely free. Doesn't matter whether you're a Microsoft school or not, you can use that at office.com. But it's also brilliant for teachers, especially teachers who are maybe new to presenting information and content in a digital mode. And I've mentioned Picture Dictionary. So there are a few little examples of when we talk about inclusively designed. All of those links will be available to you. All of those are completely free. When we think on the well-being side, if you're not familiar with Reflect, it's built into Microsoft Teams. And Reflect is a tool, a check-in tool, which collects subjective well-being data. I say to people, this is kind of like having a heartbeat of emotional check-ins alongside all of the rest of your information around student grades, student participation, student activity online. Also, what Reflect does is it helps to build that critical emotional granularity. So students learn how to recognize, understand, label, express, and ultimately to regulate emotions. There's 52 emotion characters called the feeling monsters available in Reflect. It's a great experience and it's just part of Teams for Education. Obviously, Minecraft has got Mindful Night available to you, which is the medieval quest towards mindfulness, which engages students in mindful listening, mindful writing, mindful observation, mindful breathing exercises. There's a great teacher course available. There's excellent materials to support it. And I think to date, there's been close to 800,000 gameplays within Mindful Night in Minecraft. So that touches on, if you like, part of the social and emotional learning tools. You can find out about all of them there at that web address. And most of those are completely free, regardless of which platform you're using in your school, which learner management tool you're using, with the exception of Reflect. Reflect is available in Teams, but there is a free Kahoot game, and there's also a free Flipgrid games and activities using the Feeling Monsters. When we look at the final category of accelerating learning, I've just pulled out a couple of examples. One is obviously the free tool MakeCode, which ties in to the Microsoft Computer Science Curriculum Toolkit, also free. So we have a number of tools and features which help prepare students with the skills that they need and the dispositions they need to engage positively in computer science career pathways through schooling and position them ultimately for jobs in the burgeoning, with the right, if you like, the right technical skills for the digital economy. And you'll be able to find that in this presentation on MakeCode. The last thing that I'm going to finish up with, and I think I'm running okay on time, as I said, consider this to be an invitation. We know that the efficacy of teachers is one of the largest contributing factor to student success. And whether or not you agree with Hattie's research, with over 300 million students, 80,000 studies, he looked at all of the things which make a difference to learning, and a lot of things make a difference to learning, but some things make a difference to learning more than others. Number one is how much a group of teachers feel they can make a difference. And if you look down the list, at number 4, still very high, how well students feel in control. Comes back to that control. Student efficacy, the belief that they have the skills and support that they need to do well. When people believe that, when they know it, they do well. So for Microsoft, what we have are programs. You've heard some of these folks speak who are MIE fellows, and we thank them. Many of you would be part of the Showcase School program, or some of your leaders would be involved in our Leaders in Digital Transformation of Education program. All of these obviously free and build around this notion of how do we build capacity. Another quick one is our Microsoft Education Learning Centre, which has just moved. You know, we've had over 40 million attendees joining 59,000 trainings, that's face-to-face. We've had 2.2 million courses covered in the first 3 months of this year. Microsoft Educator Centre is now moving. It's on its way to Microsoft Learn Educator Centre. So if you haven't had a chance to look at the new Microsoft Learn Educator Centre, the link will be in this presentation. So what I want to do is just to finish up on, this is how we're thinking. We're thinking around how do we empower every learner on the planet to achieve more, and who do we mean by every? And we mean every in the sense of regardless of, as I said before, location, identity, ability, income. We see the greatest role for technology in education here isn't just to digitize the content, the curriculum. That's a useful thing, but it's how we can use the technology to humanize it. How do we use technology to listen at scale, to collect and share back information that allows people to make real-time decisions? How do we use technology to give every student voice, choice, and also agency in their learning? So let's wrap it up there. As I said right at the start, it's an invitation to follow up with me. It's also an introduction to what Microsoft is focused on this year around supporting equitable education with a focus on flourishing well-being, on accelerating learning, and also meeting the needs of increasingly diverse learner populations. So hi from summertime in Australia, and I'll cast back to Mark in the studio.